Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Voltron episode reviews. This is going to be for the first 3 episodes of Voltron Legendary Defender Season 3, which has just come out today. And those episodes are Changing of the Guard, Red Paladin, and The Hunted. I'm going to be reviewing the remaining 4 episodes of this 7-episode season in the next video, and right now I haven't actually watched those episodes. I've taken a break in the middle of watching them to cover the first few episodes, and then I'll cover the rest of them in the next video. And then also, there will be a full podcast review for the season 3. From the usual podcast crew. We covered Season 1, we covered Season 2, we're going to be covering Season 3. And that will be on Sunday at the weekend. So yeah, so let's get down to talking about these opening 3 episodes. Overall, I really liked what I've seen, and I'm excited to see where the season goes with the remaining 4 episodes, in that they had like 2 things they really needed to do here, and that was execute really well on the reforming of Team Voltron and how they deal with all the different character changes, line changes, and all this sort of stuff, actually developing the characters. And then also introduce Lotor and what's happening with the Galra quite well. And I think they have accomplished both of those things. So starting with Team Voltron, they had to address, of course, immediately what happened to Shiro and react to that. The team have lost their leader. They're just unquestionable leader who was in charge of the team, and it really kind of highlighted in a way that they almost hadn't set up anyone as second in command really. And outside of Shiro at the start of last season telling Keith that you're the one who should lead Voltron, there was no real attempt to teach him like that. So the team was kind of left in this position where they really didn't have a leader at the start here. And so immediately they have to decide on who takes over the Black Line. And I liked how they did it, in that it was initially just Lance, Keith, and then Allura putting her hand up for at least trying to see if the Black Line will react to her because of her connection to Voltron through her father making Voltron. But of course it is Keith, and the conflict here of course is that Keith's very reluctant to take on the role that Shiro kind of set for him because he doesn't want to accept that Shiro is gone, and is very kind of angry about that at the start. And then Lance is kind of angry at this because he wants to be the leader and doesn't think that Keith is suited to it. But I really liked what they did with Lance here, and that I think Lance is definitely one of the standouts from these first group of episodes, these first 3 episodes at least, in terms of them really kind of clarifying now what his position is in the team, especially without Shiro, in that how he becomes the Red Paladin after this is really interesting, in that they use the original Voltron team dynamic of Zarkon and Alfor and kind of apply that to Keith and Lance, and that yes, Keith is the leader because I suppose he's the better he's the better I suppose military kind of commander type character, whereas Lance is the kind of better, I suppose, team communicator in a way. But because fundamentally Voltron is a weapon, it makes sense to have the more military focused person as the overall leader. But they literally use the example of the red line on Voltron is the right hand, so Alfor was Zarkon's right hand man and Lance is Keith's right hand man. And in this case specifically, it's kind of Lance kind of keeping Keith honest as the leader, that he's the one always pointing out that Keith, you're going overboard, stay on target, and so on. I assume that will be a little bit further developed in the remaining episodes, but he was consistently like that. Paige also played that role a little bit of just kind of always asking Keith, lead us, because that's, I suppose, Keith's weakness is that he considers himself on the team as the kind of loner, the lone wolf in a way. And the others have to really make it clear to him, you have to actually lead us. And Lance, as I suppose, kind of being the one to pick up the slack in a way, that he was really impressive with the red line when he first jumped in, outside of not really having to adapt to the extra speed that the red line has. It was he was kind of taking up for the slack that Keith was struggling with the Black Line, because it's bigger, it's not as fast as the red line, it's not as maneuverable, but I suppose he's going to have to adapt to the fact that he's kind of now in the power position. He has to do the big leadership plays and make the big moves in the fight, rather than just being fast and maneuverable, and so on. But once they decided on the leader, they obviously had to then approach the whole situation with the red and blue line and how they'd approach doing that. And I like how they didn't just repeat themselves and have like basically everyone take a go in the red line and then everyone take a go in the blue line. Instead, they kind of just had this kind of plot reason of just like the blue line locks Lance out because fundamentally Lance, in I suppose opposing Keith and then later on accepting Keith as the leader, fundamentally I suppose made this change within his character that changed his position on the team. So he was no longer like needed as the blue Paladin, and instead basically took on the role of the red Paladin as the support to the leader, effectively second in command in the position that he's in terms of being in the like one of the most powerful lines that they have. And I liked how Allura was the one to point that out to Lance, and then she's left with the blue line, and then the shield comes down for her, and that's the reveal that Allura is going to take over the blue line, even though I suppose initially she was the one who really wanted to be the red line because her father was the previous red line. But I suppose it's more establishing that like just because you have a connection to it doesn't mean that you naturally take over that position. That fundamentally Alfor and Allura are different people with different approaches and so play different roles on the team. In that I do think ultimately the blue line is kind of a better position for Allura than the red line. And it was very fitting here because the blue line is the line most suited for like a beginner, and it allowed Allura to kind of have an interesting little character arc here of just her having to learn and adapt to piloting a line. She knows how to pilot stuff because she pilots the castle a lot, but having to adapt to a more kind of like fighter pilot style role here in the line, and make the connection with this kind of living piece of machinery that it's not just a machine that you control and command, that you actually have to make this connection with it. And so it was not until she just asked the line for help and made that kind of connection, like in a way treating it like an equal, that it fully responded to her and allowed her to get a little bit of an advantage over Lotor in the little battle that they had. So I really liked how in general they approached the lines and positioning the characters where they needed to be. But then immediately, they have Lotor enter the fray and Keith immediately wanting to rush in and fight. I suppose the Galra style of him that was kind of pointed out to us a few times, that he tends to jump in and he's going to have to learn as a leader to be more, I suppose, conscious of what his teammates are thinking about things. And he really wasn't here when he jumped straight in to pursue Lotor and really just led the team into this complete trap, and then didn't handle things all that well once they were within that trap. And it took the character arc of him basically at the end, when they do form Voltron, they've basically, through this crazy situation, learned and developed and come together as a team. But he acknowledges it at the end that like even though this would be the perfect chance to go after Lotor, that no, this is not the right time to have the final battle with him. We have to retreat now. That he actually made the good decision in the end, not to try not force things, even that they've just properly come together as a team. So I like that as the kind of almost like end point right now for the season in a way. The midpoint of the season before I've watched the last 4 episodes. So I really did enjoy that. I suppose before I get into the villain side of things, they set up a little bit with the Blades of just the fact that all these kind of worlds that they're freeing from the Empire, they are happy to be freed by Voltron, but don't really like the fact that Voltron is kind of being supported by the Blades, because that no one's making the distinction between the fact that the Galra is like a species, and there's a difference between the Empire and like the rest of the people. It's a similar thing to Avatar with the whole idea of the Fire Nation, and some people just think all the Fire Nation are evil when it is just the military of the Fire Nation that's the main like antagonistic force within Avatar The Last Airbender. And it's similar here in that it's the Galra Empire that is the villain, not the Blades, not the normal people of the Galra Empire. I do feel they need to some degree go into an exploration of what normal Galra culture is versus what has changed within the Empire. So I think some flashback stuff is probably needed back to a time before the Galra were the Empire. But yeah, that's something that they definitely are going to need to change, just in terms of how did the Blades differentiate themselves from the Empire? How did they get that trust back among the people, or how do the people come to accept that, you know, they are judging a whole species based on the actions of a group, and so on. But that was, you know, definitely interesting. That if there was any weakness, I think it's just that there's a sense with this show of just that they've made this empire so big that it's so difficult to comprehend how our one little team could like defeat them. And you know, they tried here in this scene to explain that, like, okay, rebel factions are forming on a lot of the world, and so it's kind of changing, so that like half of the worlds are now rebel worlds and half of them aren't. It's just hard to get a sense of the overall like landscape of the battle and like what exactly has happened here. But going into the villains, I suppose, to wrap up the video, the introduction of Lotor and his team, and him, I suppose, taking over the Empire. We see that Zarkon is still like alive, but he's just like really, really badly injured. We once again get a reference to the fact that Lotor was exiled and is kind of just returned. So we don't really know why that's the case, why Zarkon potentially banished him or something like that. But Hagar is obviously happy to have him in charge for now, and is obviously potentially planning something in the background. It was interesting that she just wasn't a focus at all in these episodes. But the core in the first episode was obviously Lotor establishing himself as the leader and properly taking over and getting the loyalty of everyone as the leader of the Galra Empire, which involved defeating that kind of commander guy who felt that he was the natural person to kind of take over from Zarkon. And I think Lotor is very interesting as a character, so much more interesting than Zarkon, because Zarkon, at least until we get a lot of clarification of Zarkon's backstory, Zarkon right now is just, you know, bad guy 101. He's just really, really stock standard, you know, bad guy. And especially in season 2, there was very little to his character. Lotor, though, in terms of how he presented himself, I thought was very interesting, in that the first few scenes with him make you actually really like him, and are kind of questioning, like, oh, are they going to go down this road of like the Galra Empire is now under the command of someone who actually is trying to be a good leader? In that, like, what he says to everyone is basically that, you know, the aim now is to, when we take over worlds, not enslave them, but like just let them rule themselves. But they are a part of our empire, but they can still look after themselves. They just have the support network of the empire. He is perfectly fine with not having, you know, like, you know, pure breed Galrans on his team, and that like his whole team is made up of what looks like kind of, I suppose, just mixes of species, and like the children from mix of species relationships. In that you see there's like this blind guy who has like kind of animal powers and can psychically connect with people. There is the girl with the kind of more kind of red skin. There is the main, I suppose, commander girl within his group, who I think what we're meant to assume is the person that potentially Keith freed from inside the belly of that beast back in season 2. I think that's who that character is. The one who looks a little bit more kind of human-y than the other characters. Maybe that's the idea that we're meant to take it, is that she's like a Galra human hybrid as well, or something like that. Just like Keith, and maybe they'll do something if those two ever have like a meeting. And then there's the kind of bigger woman character who's like the weapons specialist or something like that. We don't really get the greatest sense of her, but she's kind of very gung-ho about things. So overall his group is interesting, and it overall presents this idea of like, oh, now there's two teams going up against each other. It's not just, here's a new general in Zarkon's army, and here's him leading this massive assault against Voltron, and it'd be a space battle. I almost get the sense that we're going to get some sort of a really cool ground-based battle at some point between just, you know, Keith dueling Lotor with the swords and so on. You know, Paige going up against like maybe that girl with the red skin. You can sort of see the direction they're perhaps going to take with this, in terms of giving them a little bit more focus to ground-based battles, potentially, at some point. I just really do like the idea of team versus team in that Zarkon, you never really got the sense like it was ever going to be like a personal combat type thing where it would be like the 5 Paladins on the ground fighting Zarkon also on the ground. That's something I think we need a little bit more of. Don't have every fight be in the lines and Voltron. Have a few of them on the ground, because the likes of, I think, Lance, Hunk, and Page do need, I think, a chance to show themselves. And then I'm really interested to see like Allura with like a Bayard now, like if she actually does get like a blue staff or something like that, or if she still has Lance's kind of energy weapon thing that he had before. In that we saw him give her the blue Bayard, but we never saw Lance get the red one from Keith, as far as I'm aware. And then there was no mention of the black Bayard again. In that, did it go missing with Shiro, or is it still there within the black line and they just haven't really mentioned it just yet? That's an interesting one. The only suit change we saw in terms of the colors was Allura is going to be using a pink pilot suit, which is a way to kind of honor previous Paladins from the past, which was, you know, an interesting little thing they had there. But yeah, going back to Lotor and so on, he presented himself as this really good leader that was going to make these positive changes within the Galra Empire to almost make it this thing where, like, you don't mind massively if somewhere gets taken over, because his approach is so different that they're not really going to suffer. But then you kind of see that, like, okay, the problem is that, like, he's still supportive of the Empire fundamentally, and, you know, taking over leadership of places that don't really need their leadership to be taken over. We see he's still kind of anti-Voltron, to obviously, as we see, and wants to defeat them and don't agree with their idea of freedom. It's just that he's a little bit more open-minded than, say, Zarkon. So you feel that maybe if they talk to him, like, there could be some sense of, like, him being a reasonable person, and that he's different than just Zarkon, who was just the evil bad guy who you couldn't get through to at all. Lotor, you feel, potentially because he was banished or whatever reason he was banished for, you could actually get through to him. So that'll be interesting to see where exactly they do go with it. Then, of course, to see the detailed powers of all his kind of generals that he has on his team. And yeah, it was just, like, seeing his approach of just, like, he doesn't immediately go for the kill. He's trying to, like, test them out, and that, look, there must be a reason for why all the Paladins aren't together when they do their little attacks to free worlds from our Empire. Why isn't the Black Line been spotted anywhere? So he's kind of testing them, and he notices that, like, this isn't the same team that defeated my father. They're different. They're not as powerful. They can't form Voltron. And in a way, like, he kind of almost makes the mistake of pushing them so far that he kind of pushes them to form Voltron. But definitely the question right now is, what does he do and what does his group do to become powerful enough to combat Voltron? Because that's obviously the issue. Zarkon needed the crazy giant technology magic thing to fight Voltron. What's Lotor gonna do? But that's, of course, going to be the interesting thing going forward. And I suppose one of the weird things was just I suppose Keith and Allura, about their reaction to finding out about Lotor. It's just like, Zarkon has a son, and they're like, that's disgusting. And it's just like, okay, I get like he's the villain guy, but is it really like an awful thing that he happens to have a son? And then why Keith thinks, I suppose, that Lotor needs to be taken down so badly, like, just because we've got no sense of, like, that Lotor has necessarily done anything to anyone just yet, in that they were immediately like, we got to take him out. But, you know, maybe there's something, maybe the Blades told him something in the past, or something like that. But yeah, going forward, I suppose some brief predictions before I'm literally just about to watch the remaining 4 episodes of the season. I hope we touch on, to some degree, what's happened to Shiro. Because I've liked the overall effect that it's had on the rest of the group, with Shiro being gone. But I do still think that, like, it's a weird plot point that he just disappeared. Like, no context in any way given for potentially what on earth happened to him, where he went, why what happened to him happened. It just felt like, we need to get rid of Shiro to do what we want to do in season 3. Let's just literally make him disappear. So I think they need to explain some of that in a little bit more detail than they have. Whether or not they do the full explanation this season, maybe have him be like a cliffhanger ending type thing, I'm not sure. They did a little bit of setup already with Paige looking for Matt. I don't know if they'll commit to doing that this season or not, because it just seems so focused on rebuilding Voltron that this season feels like it's just going to be the initial engagements against Lotor. What else? I suppose just stuff like Earth, like just that we're so far removed from Earth that it doesn't really feel like that's a factor anymore. And I'd like to see maybe something like Lotor realizes that like basically all of the Paladins are from Earth and targets their homeworld. That would be a really cool thing to do, just to see how like, wait, we could see a lot of the characters' families and see how they react to now like their son or daughter being now a Paladin of Voltron, and the idea of like, is Earth fully aware of all these other alien species, that sort of thing. Because the Kerberos mission was meant to like establish like if there's other life out in the galaxy. Now that we know that there is, but it felt like we've moved away from that already. Anything else? Hunk I still feel like needs a little bit of an arc. I don't know if they can do anything with him right now. For the most part, I think just within the team, there's been a little bit more to him than just the food stuff, but I definitely want more out of him. Yeah, I think that's really all I want to talk about just now. As I said, I've only seen the first 3 episodes, and they're my thoughts on them. So, very, very positive so far. No real issues so far. I think what's going to be important is, I suppose, knowing if season 3 is a 7-episode season, or if it's just a larger season split into 2 and they're just calling the first 7 episodes season 3. So I think a lot depends on if episode 7 of this season is an actual season ending kind of cliffhanger level type thing, or if it just feels like the middle of a season. That's going to be very telling of like the idea of like, is it written as a 7-episode season, or is it just happens to be chopped in half? So that's been my review for the first half of Voltron Season 3. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episodes. But yeah, I'll see you in the next video covering the last 4 episodes. So thanks for watching, and bye.